Hello and welcome to the Final Frontiersman. This is a small YouTube channel where we like to talk about Star Trek, and we hopefully like to talk together with as many Star Trek fans out there. Our primary focus, or what I'd like to think is our primary focus, is on the Star Trek Adventures role-playing game by Modifius Games. This is going to be one such video as I give a review of sorts and overview of the Star Trek Discovery 2256 to 2258 campaign guide for the role-playing game. One thing I want to say first before I actually get into the gist of this review, I think it's something that maybe needs to be said early, is I know that Star Trek Discovery is a very divisive series amongst the fan base currently. I myself, I wouldn't call me a fan, and I'll get more into this after I actually kick off the review, but I'm not a fan of Discovery, and with that said, I'm going to be as fair and impartial to this product as I can be, without having my own opinions on the series sway me as to one way or the other. So, yeah, again, I'll probably ramble more about that later, but just to get us started, our usual style for reviews are, we have an alert system. The first is the yellow alert, things that I think the listener or the viewer should keep in mind or maybe would be interested in, something that they might not be thinking about, but this might grab your attention and you might want to pay attention to it. The next is the red alert for the things that I think are just really good and everyone should make note of, that this is something that is one of the strong points of the product or the series, whatever it is we're reviewing. And the last is the very rarely used black alert, the things that take things in an entirely new direction, unexpected, really shift where we are at this point, like you see in Star Trek Discovery, and just take you to anywhere in the universe. It just throws things for a loop. That's a black alert, again, very rarely used. So, I want to, again, I'll just give a slight more preface to this before I go into the review. I'm going to go down kind of chapter by chapter, but not in any real depth or trying to be spoilery in any way, but just to talk about what's there and what I think is interesting and useful in it. But again, before I get into that, because again, it's a small channel, I know people aren't watching, but even if somebody stumbles across it here, there's going to be people who don't want to watch simply because I'm talking about Star Trek Discovery. And I hope I've been saying Discovery the whole time because I've been thinking of Voyager. So if I say Voyager, I've been binge watching it. Please ignore me. But there's going to be people who want to turn this off simply because I'm talking about Discovery. And then there's going to be people who want to turn it off because maybe I'm not the biggest fan of Discovery. So the people who like Discovery probably aren't going to want to watch it. And the people who do like Discovery are not going to want to watch it. So like both sides are probably going to have the reasons for not wanting to watch it. Again, it's a very divisive series, but that's not the point of this review. This is about the product for the role-playing game. So as I do with the usual role-playing game videos, I am going to teleport myself down into the bottom corner, like so. And that way I have freedom to still kind of be on camera talking to you, whoever you are, and look at my notes very unprofessionally, as it were, while you get to have beautiful artwork. And the artwork in this game is really gorgeous. You get to look at the artwork and maybe some examples of what I'm talking about instead of my graven image. So to get us started off, again, this is the Discovery Campaign Guide 2256 to 2258. That covers seasons 1 and 2 of Star Trek Discovery before they go into the future at the end of season 2. Spoiler alert. So going down chapter by chapter, I'm just taking a look at my PDF here. Again, here's a great way to start off. Again, Modiphius Games, they are really my favorite publisher, role-playing game publisher currently. They've blown every other publisher out of the running since I've gone into Star Trek Adventures. I mean, the game itself is blowing me away. But what they do is, if you buy their product, no matter where you buy the product from, like the actual physical book, they will give you a free PDF copy of it. And if you buy directly from them on modifius.com, or I think the UK one is modifius.net, you will automatically get a free PDF. And any updates that happen to these PDFs, you will receive those for free as well. Great process, great service to their customers. So I have a PDF as well as a physical book. And in my last review, I lamented how I could not get the physical book because of just the situation in the world right now with shipping and prices. But I have it now. And I do have a PDF. So just going down chapter by chapter. First of all, the chapter number 1 is the state of the galaxy, where it talks about what, again, the Federation and also the Klingons, because Klingon Empire plays a huge role in Discovery, at least the first 2 seasons, what they are like at this point in the mid-23rd century, before the original series. And what I think this is actually some of the best stuff in the entire book. And it doesn't just stop here in chapter 1. What I'm going to say really carries over to over 50% of this book. But the descriptions that the writers for this book provide for not just the history, but the technology, the planets, the people, every concept that you see in seasons 1 and 2 of Discovery, and it even goes beyond that, before Discovery, after Discovery. It touches on a lot of things in the history and the state of the galaxy at this time. It is so well written. What I mean by that is, as I said, I am not the biggest fan of Discovery. I'm not going to go so far as to say I hate it, where there was a point in time where I did say that. But I have given it another chance, and honestly, I gave it another chance because of the people who wrote this book. I watched the continuing conversation episode where the writers talk about the work they put into this book, and they convinced me to do something I never thought I would do, and that is go back and revisit Discovery. Not necessarily to give it a second chance, but to watch it from a different perspective. And you can see that perspective they have in, especially this chapter, but in this book, where there are a lot of the concepts, there are a lot of the plot elements from seasons 1 and 2 of Discovery phrased in such a way in this book that it makes it sound better than I felt I got on screen watching the actual series. It was very intriguing, and reading the way they frame the story that you see in Discovery, and this goes on to chapter 2 and chapter 3 as well, where they actually give sort of a blow by blow of each season. It really sounds like something I want to learn more about, and fortunately, that's what these chapters do. They give you a lot more detail for the world building. They give you little hooks to help tie what you see in Discovery, which one of the biggest complaints of Discovery is it doesn't feel like it fits in to the Star Trek universe, especially in that time period. and especially with what follows too, it just feels completely out of place. But the way they write it and the hooks they provide without outright saying, this is that, just the way they explain things, as you're reading it, it makes you think, oh, well, that could explain why in Discovery it's like this, but it's not like that later. Or that may explain why the Klingons look so different in Discovery. This could explain why you don't see this technology anymore. This could explain why the uniforms look like this. It's so expertly done that it takes nothing away from what Discovery has established for itself, that the fans of Discovery certainly like, but it also gives an out for those fans who don't like what Discovery did and feel that it doesn't seamlessly connect in with the Star Trek world that they know and love. It provides a way of looking at the material where you can see, oh, it does fit in because of this, or it can fit in because of this. This makes sense for that. So again, I don't want to spoil it. I don't want to give it away, but I think it's a great chunk of history. I think it's a great breakdown of what we get in Star Trek Discovery that's put in a way that people who do love the series and who don't love the series can get a lot out of it for your own game world building. If you're setting a game in this time period, you could do it without any connection to Discovery itself, but there's plenty of meat to sink your teeth into. And I think, again, starting with Chapter 1, going into Chapter 2 and 3, which goes through Seasons 1 and 2 of Discovery, there's so much to work with here. Honestly, I started reading this book while I was between sessions of the most recent episode for my game group, and there were some things I read in here that I liked so much that even within the first 20 pages, I don't even remember what it was, like 20, 30 pages or so, I found ideas I loved so much that I worked it into the plot of the story that was currently happening in my game. And I just sprinkled that into our game that I want to explore later and I want to use in a future episode for my game. To really go into some of these great ideas that the writers of Star Trek Adventures built into this book. So honestly, I really, really recommend reading at least the first half of this book. If no matter what side of the fence you're on for Star Trek Discovery, if you're a Star Trek fan and you like Star Trek Adventures in this time period, this is amazing stuff. And it really does remind me of the old West End Games Star Wars books, where they did so much world building that we didn't have back in those days, because there was only the Star Wars trilogy and those crazy Ewok movies and a smattering of other things. It was just the role-playing game that helped inform the books that came later, that helped inform even the movies later, because some of the ideas were so good and established by the role-playing game that even George Lucas took them and used them in some of his material for the prequels. That's what these Modiphius books feel like, especially now, the most recent ones. Honestly, if you're a Star Trek fan, this is a great resource. If you're a Star Trek Adventures fan, this is an amazing resource. So highly recommend it. Already, we're in Chapter 1. I'm already saying I love this book. I'm recommending this book to everyone. Even for a read, even if you're not going to use it Love it. Now, here's one other thing from chapter 1, I believe it is, that I think I could give a yellow alert, because this might be something that some people who want to run games in this era would be interested in. And even for casual Star Trek fan, there is a really nice 2-page spread, timeline of key events ranging from the year 2053 to 2258. So over 200 years of timeline for the early Federation, like even pre-Zephyr Cochrane launch to the end of, just after the end of Star Trek Discovery Season 2. So if you want a little more detail to fill in this very vague, dark part of Federation history, you got a couple pages in there that do that. So that's my little yellow alert for that. For people who want that little history thing, there you go. Again, chapter 2 and 3, that's kind of a summary of season 1 and season 2 of Star Trek Discovery. Again, I like the way it explains the story better than what I saw on screen. So for me, it was really nice following along. I was rewatching, well, not rewatching, I was actually watching season 2 as I was reading this, and I would go back after I watched an episode and I would read that point in the guide, and I really got so much more appreciation out of what I saw on screen based on how they framed it in this book. So at least for the first 2 seasons of Discovery, this is also a viewer's guide that I think makes watching it a little more enjoyable, because there's so much more detail and depth you can get from the concepts they put out on screen that maybe they just don't have time for to explain, or maybe they didn't even explain it themselves. It's a great watcher's guide as well. So I'll leave it at that. Going on to chapter 4. Chapter 4 is another interesting one. Chapter 4 is probably going to appeal to a lot of game masters, or a lot of people running Star Trek adventures. It's now a history of the Terran Empire from the Mirror Mirror universe. So anyone who wants to get details on, again, the early Terran universe, and also Terran technology, Terran political systems, they have a whole chapter dedicated to that here, and it's really interesting. Again, it's a really good read. This whole thing, like I said, like West End Games Star Wars, this is just a great resource to have as a fan of Star Trek. So anything you want to do in the Terran Mirror Mirror universe, this is going to give you a leg up on that. So again, can recommend it for that. Chapter 5 is where we get into the actual mechanics for the role-playing game. Chapter 5 are the new life path options, which are, of course, the new species that you could play as. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 new species you could play as, and a 6th that isn't a species, but it's the cybernetically enhanced being, like you see in Star Trek Discovery. So 5.5 new species that you could play as, basically, including the, I'm probably going to get the pronunciations right, because I don't really know Discovery that well, but the Barzan, the Kelpians, the Osnolis, the Zahian or Zahian, again, I don't know, and the Saurians. Now, here's the thing with the Saurian. I knew the one character, Linus, in the series. I knew he was a Saurian. And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, whatever. But I never put 2 and 2 together that the well-known Saurian Brandy, that's from his race. I had no idea. Yeah, it just occurred to me as I read it mentioned in this book. Like, oh, yeah, that makes perfect sense. So that was a nice little thing I learned reading this book. But yeah, the cybernetically enhanced people. So if you want to have, like, you have the cybernetic eyes, you have the one character, I think her name was Miriam, who looked almost completely robotic. Possibly she was intended to be a robot in season 1 before they realized Data is the first android. But you can use these rules to have your character be cybernetic to various degrees, and it really explains how the cybernetics works as we see in Star Trek Discovery, and how you could use it, and why you don't see cybernetics like this later. Again, it covers those bases in such a very appropriate way that fits into what you see in the TV series of Discovery, but it goes into so much more detail to explain it, and I love the way they do that. So that's chapter 5. I do want to mention one other interesting thing. I think it comes in chapter 5. There is the race in season 2, the Bao, who a very strange alien race that live on the same planet as the Kelpians that have them subjugated. Again, not going to go into Discovery spoilers, but their technology is more organic, and the description of their technology in this book ties in how, when they become friendly with the Federation, this organic technology eventually leads to what we see in Star Trek Voyager of the bioneural gel packs that power the Intrepid class. So again, I thought the writers do such a great job of linking all these little things, these odd things that you see throughout Discovery, and making such a logical flow into what we know from older 90s Trek. So I just thought that was so nice. I have no idea if any of that is supposed to be official, but it makes perfect sense. And another reason why I really enjoy this book so much. The next section, chapter 6, I'm giving a red alert. This is the chapter about the starships. So there are 10 new Starfleet space frames, which this is the main reason why I'm giving it the red alert. Klingons also, I think there's 11 Klingon ships too. This expands the number of starships you have available so much, especially if you're playing a TOS game or even a post-Enterprise game. So that space, post-Enterprise, pre-TOS, into TOS as well, you now have so many more options for starships and space frames other than the Constitution class, the Miranda class, the staples that everyone knows already. This gives you just an entire fleet to work with, and it goes into a lot of detail of why they were built, what their purpose was, how they fulfilled a necessary role in early Federation, and why they were eventually just brought out of service. Again, for anyone running an earlier Enterprise TOS era game, even if you're not touching Discovery at all, the options this gives you are really, really useful. So just for that alone, I'm giving you a red alert. You also have, of course, some Section 31 ships. There are some independent ships as well, like the Bao'ul fighter. But really, the beautiful part of this chapter are the extra Klingon ships, a whole new variety for the Klingons, as well as the Federation ships for this early era. So I love this chapter. I thought that was great. I'm looking for opportunities how to use these old ships in my games in a post DS9 era. But if I can find a way, I'm definitely going to use them. The next chapter, I'm going to give actually a yellow alert into this chapter. This is a game mastering chapter. This is about how to run a game in this era during the Federation Klingon War and during the Red Angel incident. There's a lot of good advice, but what I'm giving the yellow alert to, I think this is going to be really helpful to game masters for any era, actually. But there is a section about doing story arcs and milestones for the characters, and it breaks it down position by position. So you have your CO, the XO, science officer, communications officer. It does such a good job of explaining these positions again, how they're used in the stories, and how you can focus on them to build them up for their milestones or their arc milestones. Just the way they break it down, I think, would help a lot of game masters who struggle to figure out, what should I do with the medical officer? What should I do with the communications officer? I need a good idea to use my ops manager. This chapter, just these little brief snippets of how to focus on these positions, I think can be taken by any game, any era, and any game master to really help you if you're struggling on how best to incorporate any of these positions into your game. And it might be a good way of encouraging any player in your group who feels like their position doesn't get enough to do, or doesn't really seem clear what they should be doing. This chapter is going to help you with that so much. So even if you don't worry about game mastering in this early era, reading this part on how to handle all those bridge positions, I think is a universal I don't even know what I'm saying, a universal skill that can be applied to every single game that you run in Star Trek Adventures. So that's my yellow alert. You might want to think about getting the book simply for that alone, even though, like I said, there is so much to have in this book that I do highly recommend it. We're getting to the end now. The last is, there's one more. There's one more part in the Game Master section, and also chapter 9. I'm going to talk about that. The Game Master section has the mission briefs, the short one-page snippets to create a story for your game, or to weave it into a story you already have. You probably know what mission briefs are by now. And also chapter 9's the mini campaign. I just want to say I skimmed the mission briefs, and I just briefly looked at the campaign itself. I mentioned in earlier videos, though I don't expect anyone to have seen it, I don't run mission briefs. I don't run pre-made campaigns. So every game I run is a game I write myself. So I kind of avoid reading a lot of the pre-published scenarios, so mission briefs and the campaigns. I try to avoid reading it, because everything I read, and especially in this book is so good, but everything I read gives me new ideas on what I want to do, what stories I want to tell. So the reason why that's bad is, first of all, I'm already overwhelmed with ideas that I want to do, that I don't need new ideas like this distracting me and throwing me off the plot I'm trying to do for my series. And secondly, a lot of these stories are really good. I've read through some of them before, so I know what goes into these mission briefs, what goes into these adventures, what goes into these campaigns. They're really good, and if I read it, I'm probably going to want to take a lot from it. And if I want to take a lot from it, my thought is, well, if I'm going to take it, I might as well just do the whole thing. And I just can't do that. I can't run pre-made things. That's a personal thing for me. But again, if you like having pre-made scenarios, mission briefs, or adventures, this is providing you 8 Federation, 4 Klingon mission briefs, and then a 3-part mini campaign. So you get a lot of mileage out of this book if you want a pre-made scenario. So for those of you who are interested in that, there you go. I can recommend it for that. There's a lot to deal with. The last chapter is one step back. It's in the middle of what I was just talking about. Chapter 8 is the Allies and Adversaries. The Allies and Adversaries chapter, with some creatures too. Those focus on the key characters that you encounter during seasons 1 and 2 of Discovery. So you could use them as NPCs. So you get a little bit of a background and a rundown of who these major players are from the series and what role they can fulfill if you use them in your game, and how best to use them in the game. One thing I should do as a yellow alert, because again, this is something that you should be aware of, you should take note of. The actual cast, the main crew, the senior staff, the stars of Star Trek Discovery are not in this book. There are, I believe right now, 3 separate character packs, PDF character packs you could get on Modifius, on .com or .net, for Season 1 Discovery characters, Season 2 characters, Season 3 characters, which also includes the USS Discovery itself. So they are not located here. If you actually want the stats to use for your game of the actual stars, you will have to go to the character pack. This book is just for running a campaign in the time period of Discovery Season 1 and 2. It is not exactly a Star Trek Discovery simulator, so you will have to get those characters from elsewhere. So that is basically the brief rundown of what's in the book. As I said, I am not a fan of Discovery, even though I don't hate it anymore. Actually, the writers of this book, listening to them talk, as I said, they gave me the inspiration to go back, and I watched Season 2. I watched it the whole way through, and you know what? I actually enjoyed it more than I thought I was going to. I actually enjoyed it, period. It's not really one I'm going to probably go back and revisit, but I think... No, never mind. I talk long enough. This video is going to go longer if I talk about that. I'll just do a review video for Season 2 Discovery later. But the point is, this book is great as a resource for Star Trek. This book is great as a resource for the GM, even if you want nothing to do with Discovery itself, and especially if you do want it to tie into Discovery. This has so much for everyone, for every fan, for every player. I highly recommend it. One thing I did forget to mention in Chapter 1 that I thought was really, really interesting is they talk about the different planets in the Federation, the different colonies and the different worlds. And I don't think they've done this in the earlier books. Correct me if I'm wrong, but they have a little section as part of the description on these worlds for how the people who live on that planet behave and respond. So if you were going to create a character who was raised on such and such colony, these are the kind of things that they focus on. These are the kind of things they're good at. This is what the colony is known for. I thought that little boost to helping people role play and get a better idea of what their character would have experienced on these worlds, I thought that was such a good idea. And again, I don't remember seeing this in the other books. I could be forgetting, but if it's in the other books, let me know. I thought that was a nice little thing to add in, to not just have flavor text about these planets, but actually provide you some guidance for using it in your game as a player or as a GM. So that was nice. Anyhow, enough is enough. I'm going to jump back and scare the children. So I super recommend this book for anyone playing Star Trek Adventures and for people who just like having reference material about anything Star Trek lore related. I think you could get so much out of this for your games or just for your own personal enjoyment as a fan, as a Trekkie. So highly recommended. Don't let the divisiveness, don't let the clashing opinions get to you. Honestly, when this game was announced, when this book, I should say, was announced for Star Trek Adventures, I said this is going to be the one book in the line that I don't buy. And I was wrong then, and I was wrong about it. I should not have judged it based on the opinion I had at the time of the series. This is probably one of the best books I've read in the lineup so far. Modifius gets better and better with each successive book that comes out for Star Trek Adventures, and as this is one of the most recent, it shows. This, again, add it to your library, even if it's only the PDF. It's well worth a read. So that's all I have to say about it. It's just going to be me repeating the same thing over and over as I have been doing. Please check it out. And again, if your opinion differs, by all means, that's fine. You could talk about it in the comments. I will engage with you. I would like to talk with you about it. You could talk to me here on YouTube in the comments. You could reply on Twitter. That's where we're the most active. Twitter at @TheFinalFM. We are also barely existing on Instagram, also at @TheFinalFM. But yeah, hit us up anywhere. Talk about Star Trek. Talk about anything. Disagree with me. Agree with me. Tell me what you love personally about Star Trek Adventures, and I will continue talking to you for longer than you are comfortable with. So thank you for watching. If you made it this far, I don't even want to look and see how long this video is because I get scared every single time I make one. But if you made it this far, good for you. You know what? You got dedication, or you just walked away and YouTube's playing in the background. In any case, I want to thank you for watching. Please stick around. I hope this has given you at least a little bit of entertainment, if not been informative and helped you make a purchasing decision. So peace and long life. See you in the future.